is turning to the National Security Agency, who you heard Mr. Jones mention just a minute ago, to protect itself from hackers in the wake of a cyber attack it believes came from China. Now, the NSA conducts surveillance and code breaking for the federal government, but it also has a long history of spying. Here to talk about the pairing is historian Webster Tarpley. Webster, thanks for joining us. Now, this is kind of a turnaround for Google, who has really not been in cahoots with Washington before over surveillance. In fact, they've resisted them significantly. So what does this mean that they're, in essence, turning to the enemy for help?
Let me say, first of all, I think quite the contrary. They've always been intimately linked and may indeed have been founded by the U.S. intelligence community, as I'll try to show. Remember, now, this is the National Security Agency. It used to be the most secretive. This is cyber espionage, and their mission is quite simply to monitor everybody's electronic communications, everybody's SIG-int, as they call it. So it's hard to imagine how they can object to somebody hacking when their mission is basically to hack the entire world.
Well, couldn't you argue they know it best, so they would be able to fight it best?
Well, this is, of course, a policy of confrontation with China, which is now opening up a cyber warfare theater, which I think is absolute folly. The news is that Google is now openly in alliance with the NSA in response to these attacks, which Google claims, and I stress that because there's no independent confirmation of any of this, Google claims that China hacked Google, and now they're joining with the NSA. What we learned from the Washington Post article of February 4th is it's not for the first time. We're told that over the past decade, not just Google, but Silicon Valley companies in general have been turning to the U.S. intelligence community, the NSA, for guidance and protection. And we're also told that it's not just the NSA, but the NSA is the lead agency of the entire U.S. intelligence community. So we've now got a cartel where Google joins with the NSA. It's a cartel sponsored by the CIA, the NSA, and they're going to essentially engage in cyber warfare with China. What they hope to gain from this, I do not know.
Okay, you mentioned these other Silicon Valley companies, but until now, Google has been one of the ones that has resisted pressure from Washington to turn over records, even taking them to court over the issue. So how can you just group Google with all of those other companies?
I'm afraid this is eyewash. This is essentially an attempt to create a cover story. It's true that Google claims that they did not cooperate with the terrorist surveillance project back in 2007, 2008. But let's just look at two important things. Who founded Google? How did Google get this tremendous supremacy starting in the late 90s? Well, it turns out that there's a CIA proprietary nonprofit company called In-Q-Tel. And In-Q-Tel, created back in 1999 or so under Norman Augustine, he's a famous industrial military complex entrepreneur. Their goal was to invest in the most advanced IT and cyber companies so that the U.S. intelligence community would always be at the forefront. Did they invest in Google? We know they did at least at one point. CIA created Project Keyhole, the satellite imaging of the surface of the Earth. Project Keyhole was sold to Google, and it became Google Earth. And that's what you can see online. And this was a couple of $1 million of startup capital from In-Q-Tel. Now, the other aspect, does Google really object to censorship? Well, people in this country know they don't. Case in point, a famous FBI whistleblower, Sybil Edmonds, was about to testify in Congress. She had a story which was very damaging to the U.S. official account of 9/11. She happened to have her blog at Google Blog. Right before she was going to testify, Google blocked her blog. And she was not accused of anti-state activity or something like this, but of spamming. So she was found guilty of spamming, and they shut down her blog at a critical time. This is one of dozens of examples that we could cite of how the hypocrisy of Google can be shown through what they've actually done, as distinct from a couple of high-profile stunts that they've pulled in public to try to accredit themselves as being independent, and they're not. And now it's clear in public that they're not.
Well, Webster's is a higher level, much larger secret intelligence agency, and it's a national security agency.
Right. So Google, its relationship with the NSA is unclear, as most things with the NSA are unclear. We know that they've done business together before. We know that Google sold them some products before, some servers. And we also know, excuse me, or we believe we know, that when Google suffered a pretty vicious hack attack earlier this year, it turned to the NSA, it turned to sort of the information security specialists of the NSA to help them out and try to figure out what was going on. Now, it gets a little bit complicated because that side of the NSA is not quite as black hat as the side that spies on us. There's actually kind of two divisions within the NSA, one that's relatively benign and one that's relatively not benign. But it's yet another example of how Google and the country's intelligence agencies are starting to get closer and closer together.
Have there been any attempts in other countries to begin to place limits on some of this cooperation between Google and or they're being able to use what they're doing here in the United States to spread to other countries?
You know, the answer I'm sure is yes, but I don't have details. I'm sorry.
Well, let me ask John Simpson. What are you calling on Congress to do?
Well, we want to know exactly what Google was trying to do when it sucked up all this personal communications when it was doing the Y-spying. And we're also very concerned about precisely the nature of this growing relationship between our intelligence agencies and Google. And we think that both of those things need to be a subject of a hearing. Just like Tony Hayward came in and had to explain the Gulf oil spill, we think that Chairman Eric Schmidt needs to be called before the appropriate committee to explain what I think is the biggest information spill, if you will, in history. It's virtually wiretapping what they were doing with the Wi-Fi networks, and they need to be called on the carpet to account for that and why they did it. And so far, there's been no adequate explanation of what they were trying to do.
Who is championing this in Congress? John, who is championing this in Congress, and what is Google's response, not to mention the intelligence agency, if you can gather this, to your Inside Google project, a consumer watchdog?
Well, Google has not been our best friend, you could say. In fact, early on when we put out a press release they didn't like, they actually tried to get our charitable funding revoked, contacted the Rose Foundation and suggested we ought not to be funded, which was not very good. In Congress so far, we have not had anyone respond to the call. We believe that the appropriate committee would be Commerce and the House Energy and Commerce Committee, possibly House Judiciary Committee, because they have jurisdiction over wiretap legislation. So we're still optimistic, particularly when, in the light of our poll, we had overwhelming support for some kind of a hearing from the voters that we polled. We think possibly when the Congress people are back in their districts, maybe they will indeed hear some of the concern from their constituents. So we're optimistic that there will be a hearing.
John Simpson, I want to thank you.
Ever feel like you're being watched? Instead of looking behind your back, you may want to look at your computer. Turns out school administrators in Philadelphia use students' laptops to spy on them. Alex Jones is a radio host. He joins us from Austin, Texas to talk about this topic. Mr. Jones, I was reading this story about the Philadelphia school officials, and first thing that came to my mind was how dumb they were to really even come out and admit that this was even going on in the first place.
Absolutely. They're throwing it in everyone's face. We've since then found a front line from PBS, public television in the U.S., where they went into a school and the school administrators showed them how they're watching the students via the webcams and photographing them and videotaping them. But going back 4 years ago, Google, of all groups, put out a press release. I mean, they are just throwing it in our face like we're so stupid we'll just accept it if they just put this 1984 development right on the table, kind of hidden in plain view. Google said that they were launching software where the microphone and video cameras that are on all new computers, in the last 4 or 5 years it's been put in all the new systems, where they watch you and listen to you using keyword software, because they can't have millions of people physically listening and transcribing. It's NSA echelon type systems that if a dog's barking, Google pops ads up on your screen for dog food or dog toys or dog treats. That was the example that Google itself used. And then 3 years ago, I discovered the federal government, through grants, is paying all over the U.S. for public schools, even private schools. It's giving them the taxpayer-funded laptops enabled with this software and encouraging the schools to watch them in the school when they're at home. And the principal in this Philadelphia school said, look, I've seen you doing naughty behavior. We don't know if it was drugs or what it was at home, and it was calling students in. So they think that 1984 is completely kosher and acceptable and just throw it in people's face. So you hit on the key there. But this is much more widespread. It's come out that the FBI, well, back in 1996, the federal government ordered through the Telecommunications Act that all new cell phones by 2001 be tracked in real time. The government can dial in even when your phone is off and listen to you. They do this without warrants. Wow. And so now our media, our government is just announcing this, saying Big Brother is watching you at a level much worse than what George Orwell envisioned back in 1948. And we have detailed articles up at Infowars.com and PrisonPlanet.com that break this down. And I would tell people 4 years ago with Google's own press release about this, they didn't believe me. But now people are really starting to find out what's happening.
Mr. Jones, I mean, on a lighter note, just wanted to let you know that I am watching and seeing you through this camera. But on a much more serious note, what interest or what purpose does it serve Google and the government to finally let the American people know that this is going on?
Because they want to start using it on a widespread basis. They want to use it in court without warrants. And the cybersecurity legislation has passed the House that openly states that it's going to recruit youth corps and people out of college and high school to man these giant cybersecurity systems, which are offensive. The Pentagon says they're going to use it to hack and attack sites they don't agree with. Cass Sunstein, the White House regulations says they want to shut down conspiracy theorists, and he lists people that believe man-made global warming isn't real. He talks about fining us, feeing us, or arresting us. I mean, they're really pushing an authoritarian agenda out in the open, and they know the public's waking up, and so they want to use these surveillance technologies they've developed. I mean, it came out 5 years ago that Google was really founded with NSA and CIA money through In-Q-Tel. I've had former CIA technology officers on my radio show, again, 4 and 5 years ago, breaking this down. And so Google has kind of had its coming out party. And, I mean, here's another example. Google Buzz, criticized for disclosing Gmail accounts, PC World. Here's another one. Why Google has become Microsoft's evil twin. PC World. Steve Jobs of Apple says the "Don't be evil" slogan of Google is, quote, a joke. Google is in the same complex as NASA. Google has sold itself as this loving, friendly organization because it's really the Pentagon and the Anglo-American establishment. And they're now coming in saying that if you use Buzz, they're going to track who you email, who you talk to, what you do. I have Google software on my phone. It's always popping up saying, let us mark your location and track you as if I'm going to opt in. So they're just robbing us of our liberty and our privacy in the open. They're just right out in the open doing it, thinking that we're so weak-minded that we'll just go along with it. But the good news is there's a big backlash. The bad news is the FBI is investigating Philadelphia. Come on. The FBI has been caught using OnStar and other systems to listen to people in their cars, cell phones, millions of warrantless wiretaps. We got the secret Homeland Security MIAC report from law enforcement in January of last year and broke that internationally that police gave us, where Homeland Security internally and Northcom, our military jurisdiction over the U.S. now, states that this whole system is set up for the conservatives, libertarians, gun owners, returning veterans. It has nothing to do with shadowy men over in a cave.
Mr. Jones.
This is foreign banks.
Mr. Jones, I hate to do this to you, but...
It's not about justice, it's not about agenda, it's not about mobilizing people, it's about dialing for corporate dollars. These two parties have sold the U.S. government and the American people to the highest bidders.